On January 3rd, 2026, the world woke up to news of something that had never happened before. The president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, had been captured and brought to the United States. This all began and ended within the same day, leaving Venezuela without its sitting president before they even have time to react. The United States has invaded countries before and it has gone to wars. But this was something different. For the first time, the United States captured a sitting president inside the capital of a sovereign state, completed the entire operation in under 3 hours, and flew him directly to American soil. So naturally, almost everyone was thinking the same thing. If the United States carried out an operation of this scale, then there has to be something extremely important about Venezuela. And that part is true. But when it came to why Venezuela is important, almost everyone got it wrong. From the first hours after the news broke, attention turned to one explanation: oil. To be honest, the conclusion was easy to make. Venezuela holds the largest proven oil reserves in the world, estimated at around 303 billion barrels. That is more oil than Saudi Arabia, a country long considered central to global oil supply. But if you step back and look at the bigger picture, it becomes clear that something much bigger is going on. To understand it, we have to go back to the Cold War. In January 1959, a revolution succeeded in Cuba, and a new government took power. Before that year, Cuba had been closely tied to the United States politically and economically. But after the revolution, the Cuban government cut those ties, nationalized US-owned companies, and began building alliances with the Soviet Union. Washington responded with economic sanctions, expecting that would force Cuba back in line. Instead, the Soviet Union stepped in with support, and within a few years, Soviet missiles were positioned in Cuba, capable of hitting major US cities. Fast forward 4 decades, and something very similar began happening in Venezuela. For most of the 20th century, Venezuela had been a close ally with the United States. US oil companies had a major presence in the country, but that began to change when Hugo Chavez became president. Chavez pushed Venezuela in a new direction, reducing the influence of US companies in the oil sector, asserting stronger national control over resources, and seeking new international partners. After Chavez died in 2013, Nicolás Maduro came to power, and instead of changing direction, he continued exactly where Chavez left off. The relationship with the United States did not improve. If anything, it became worse. Maduro kept the US out of Venezuela's oil industry and began working with countries the US did not really like. And this is where things got serious, because China became the main supporter of the new Venezuela. By the time Nicolás Maduro was in power, China had already stepped in. In the same way the Soviet Union once backed Cuba, China was now backing Venezuela. And the support was not small. In 2007, China put $4 billion into a joint fund with Venezuela. 3 years later, in 2010, China took it much further and agreed to lend Venezuela $20 billion in one deal. That was an unusually large amount at the time, especially for a country already in trouble. After that, more money followed. By the mid-2000s, China had given Venezuela more than $60 billion in loans and credit. But we need to be clear about one thing. When we talk about China giving Venezuela a loan, this is not a normal loan where you give someone money, wait a few years, and then get your money back with interest. That is not how this worked. Imagine China gives Venezuela $10. Venezuela does not promise to pay that $10 back in cash. Instead, Venezuela promises to pay it back with oil, but not oil sold at the normal global price. Let's say oil on the world market is selling for $10 a barrel. Under these kinds of deals, China might be getting that same barrel for $3 or $4 instead. China locks in oil at a much lower effective price, and Venezuela agrees to send it over many years as repayment. This might sound like a ripoff at first, but for Venezuela, it is actually a huge win. Because Venezuela is under heavy sanctions. Many international banks refuse to lend to it. Many countries avoid doing business with it altogether. So when China steps in with financing, Venezuela takes the deal, even if it means giving up future oil at a discount. For China, it is also a long-term win. Instead of buying oil on the open market at full price, China secures steady supplies of crude for much less, and it does so for years into the future. But the problem is, China was not stopping at oil. Just one day before Nicolás Maduro was captured, a Chinese delegation arrived in Caracas to meet with him and talk about future plans. When you look at the timing of Maduro's kidnapping, it does not look like a coincidence. You see, during this same time, there were talks about China wanting to build a military base in Venezuela. When a country wants to build a military base in another region, it needs a reason. Countries almost never say openly that they want a base just for power. They usually say they need it for security. If China had gone to Venezuela 20 years ago and asked for a military base, it would have made no sense. China is far away. It had no major assets in Venezuela, no ports, and no infrastructure to protect. There would have been no reason to justify a base. So, in less than a decade, China invested tens of billions of dollars into Venezuela. With that much money involved, China suddenly had a clear reason to ask for a military base to protect its investments. Now look at what this means for the United States. Venezuela sits on the Caribbean Sea and has a coastline of about 1,740 miles. The country is less than 1,400 miles from Florida. Those waters are next to major shipping routes that lead to the Panama Canal, one of the most important trade passages in the world. A Chinese military base anywhere along Venezuela's coast would place Chinese forces close to U.S. territory. This is why the Venezuela situation was never just about oil. Once you zoom out, Venezuela was only one piece of a much larger picture that was already forming. Tensions between major powers are rising everywhere at once. Militaries are now preparing for real conflict, and it is not a coincidence that Donald Trump has just called for U.S. military spending to jump by more than 50% from $900 billion to $1.5 trillion. Simply put, the world is getting closer to another major war, and when you look closely at where these tensions are coming from, one thing becomes very clear. China is involved in almost all of them. Look at any country the United States considers an enemy or a serious threat, and you will almost always find China standing behind them. Russia is the clearest example. Since the war in Ukraine began, China has kept Russia's economy alive through trade and energy purchases. The same thing is happening with Iran. Iran faces heavy sanctions and international isolation. China has become one of its biggest buyers of oil and one of its most important economic partners. Without China, Iran would be under far more pressure than it is today. And until very recently, Venezuela was moving in the same direction. But China is doing all of this for one reason above everything else: Taiwan. For China, Taiwan has always been meant to be part of China. That has never changed. The only real reason it has not happened yet is the United States. U.S. military power in the Pacific has been the main barrier, so China did not rush. Instead, it focused on building strength first. It grew its economy, locked much of the world into trade with China, and supported countries that openly challenged the U.S. At the same time, it expanded its military faster than any other country. The goal was simple: reach a point where the U.S. can no longer stop it without major risk. Many experts believe China is close to that point. Chinese warplanes already fly near Taiwan almost daily. Missile units train for long-range strikes across the strait. And here is the key point: experts believe that if China is going to act, 2026 is one of the most likely years. And if China makes any move, the United States will definitely not stay silent. That would push tensions to an entirely new level. This is why the U.S. would never accept Chinese forces operating anywhere close to American territory. A Chinese military base in Venezuela would be even more dangerous for the United States than the Soviet missiles in Cuba. During the Soviet era, missiles were very slow by today's standards. Weapons took longer to reach their targets, which gave more time to react. Today, that is no longer the case. Modern Chinese missiles can travel at many times the speed of sound, reaching targets in minutes. Some are so fast that even launches from mainland China could reach the United States in a very short time. Placing weapons like that as close as Venezuela is like having a gun pointed at you around the clock. That is why Venezuela was never just about oil. If you want more videos like this, explaining global events in a simple way, make sure to subscribe to the channel.